The promise we made at 16. Part 1. The summer the world felt endless. The sky over Cedarbrook that summer seemed to stretch forever. The kind of blue that made you believe life had no limits, that you could run barefoot down the hot asphalt road and somehow never grow old. It was 2005, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and sun-warmed asphalt. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed, and cicadas sang in relentless chorus. Maya was 16 that summer. She had a pair of scuffed white Converse, a notebook filled with half-finished poems, and a laugh that often escaped before she could decide whether the moment was truly funny. She was sitting on the splintered wooden railing by Miller's Creek Bridge when Ethan came into view, carrying a skateboard hair damp from the creek, his shirt clinging to his chest. Ethan had the kind of quiet confidence that wasn't arrogance, but an easy way of taking up space. He had a camera slung around his neck, as he always did, because he claimed he was collecting proof that we were ever this young. "You're late," Maya said without looking up from her notebook. "You're early," he replied, leaning his skateboard against the railing, "which means you care more than I do." She smirked, snapping her notebook shut. "I care about being on time, that's different." They sat together in the fatting gold of early evening, legs dangling over the side, watching the water drift lazily below. Their summers had always been like this, small rituals that meant nothing and everything. But this day felt different. Maybe it was because high school was ending in 2 years, and every adult they knew kept reminding them the real world was coming. Maybe it was because Ethan had mentioned earlier that his dad was talking about moving away. Or maybe it was the way the air seemed heavier with unspoken things. Ethan broke the silence first. "Do you ever think about, 20 years from now, what we'll be like?" Maya laughed, but it was a soft, almost uncertain laugh. "I'll probably be boring, like a teacher or something. You'll probably be famous, or dead." "Wow, that's comforting." He grinned, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of fear or maybe longing. And then he said it, the words that would hang in the air long after the sound faded. "Let's promise something." Maya tilted her head. "What kind of promise?" "That no matter where we are or who we're with, we meet here, right here, 20 years from today. August 14th, 2025. No excuses." She stared at him for a moment, the cicadas buzzing louder, as if urging her to answer. "And if one of us can't make it?" "Then we wait until the other shows up," he said, "even if it takes all night." She smiled slowly. "All right, 20 years. They shook on it, and then, almost as if a handshake wasn't enough, Ethan dug into his backpack, pulled out a pocket knife, and scratched their initials into the wooden railing. M+E 2005. It was reckless, it was childish, and it felt like the most important thing either of them had ever done. That summer they didn't talk about it again, but it became an unspoken anchor, a secret between them. Part 2. The years that pull us apart. The summer after graduation came like a storm they didn't see coming. Maya left Cedarbrook for college 2 states away, majoring in English because it felt like the closest thing to the life she imagined, a life surrounded by words, by stories. Her roommate freshman year was a theater student who smoked clove cigarettes and stayed up until dawn memorizing scripts. Maya learned quickly that college wasn't a magical place where you suddenly knew who you were. It was a maze, and you walked it hopping to stumble into yourself along the way. She wrote for the campus newspaper. She worked part-time at a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso. And sometimes, when the night was too quiet, she would take out her old notebook, read the poems she wrote at 16, and wonder if Ethan was still in Cedarbrook. Ethan didn't go to college right away. His father's health declined after the move fell through, and Ethan stayed to help. He worked construction during the day, and at night he took photos, weddings, local bands, anything that paid enough for film and gas. He sent Maya a letter once that first year, but she never replied. Not because she didn't want to, but because the letter arrived during finals, and by the time she thought of what to say, weeks had passed, and it felt too late. She told herself she'd write back eventually. She never did. By 24, their lives were galaxies apart. Maya was living in Chicago, working as an editor at a small publishing house. She wore blazers now, took the train to work, and had an apartment that always smelled faintly of ink and coffee. She had a boyfriend named David, safe, reliable, with a talent for making plans 6 months in advance. Ethan had moved to Portland, chasing the freelance photographer dream. He lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, the hum of dryers his nightly soundtrack. He took risks, drove cross-country to shoot music festivals, slept in his car more times than he could count. He dated on and off but never stayed long enough for roots. And yet, the date stayed in the back of their minds. Once a year, on August 14th, Maya would glance at the calendar, her stomach tightening in a way she couldn't quite explain. She'd imagine Ethan somewhere, maybe looking at the same date, maybe forgetting entirely. She would never admit to David that sometimes she thought about another man. For Ethan, the date was different. It wasn't nostalgia, it was a reminder. Every August, he'd find himself restless, unable to work, thinking about the bridge and the girl who made him believe in forever for one fleeting summer. The first twist in their story came in the form of tragedy. Maya was 29 when she got the call. Her mother had suffered a stroke. She took a leave from work and returned to Cedarbrook for the first time in years. The house smelled exactly the same lavender detergent and the faint scent of her father's pipe tobacco. One evening, desperate for air, she walked to Miller's Creek Bridge. The initials were still there, weathered but visible. She traced them with her fingers, feeling 16 again and impossibly old all at once. Ethan wasn't there. She didn't expect him to be, but she left a small folded note under the railing, still here. M. She didn't know that 3 weeks later, Ethan would pass through Cedarbrook for a wedding shoot, wander to the bridge out of habit, and find that note. This was the moment their parallel lines bent slightly toward each other again, not enough to touch, but enough to change their course. Part 3, the note beneath the bridge. Ethan found the note late, on a Sunday afternoon. The wedding had wrapped hours earlier, the reception music still faint in his ears as he wandered away from town with his camera hanging limp at his side. He didn't even know why he went to the bridge, habit, instinct, or maybe just that August had a way of pulling him here. The initials were still carved in the railing, softened by 2 decades of rain and sun. He was running his fingers over them when he saw it, a scrap of paper folded twice, tucked under the wood. His name wasn't on it, just 3 words still here. M. He stood there for a long time, reading it over and over, feeling 16 and 29 all at once. The note was fresh, maybe a few weeks old, which meant she had been here. Maya. That night, back in his motel room, he pulled out his phone and searched her name. It took seconds to find her LinkedIn, author bios, tagged photos. She looked the same and completely different. Hair shorter, eyes sharper, smile smaller. One profile picture showed her with a man in a navy suit, his hand on her shoulder in that quiet, possessive way. Ethan hovered over the message button for hours. He typed, "Got your note," deleted it. Typed again, "I went to the bridge, I saw your words," deleted again. In the end, he sent nothing. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Maya's life was starting to show cracks. David had proposed the previous winter. She said yes, more out of habit than excitement. They'd set a wedding date, booked a venue, and yet she kept feeling this hollow ache in her chest every time she imagined walking down the aisle. Her mother's recovery was slow. Maya visited often, telling herself she was being a good daughter, but part of her knew it was more than that. Being home meant being close to the bridge, to the version of herself she'd left behind. In September, a package arrived at her apartment with no return address. Inside was a photograph, black and white, grainy, taken from the creek looking up at the bridge. And there they were, 2 silhouettes, legs dangling, heads tilted toward each other. 16, frozen in time. There was no note, no explanation, just the photograph. Maya knew instantly who had sent it. The next day she sat at her desk, the photo propped against her coffee mug, unable to focus on work. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Don't forget dinner with my parents tonight." She stared at the words, then at the photograph, then back at the words. Something inside her whispered, You don't have to go." She went anyway. Weeks passed. Ethan returned to Portland, threw himself into work, but every so often he'd open his camera bag and see the empty space where that photograph had once been. He told himself he sent it to give her something, a memory, a reminder. But the truth was, he wanted her to remember him. By the winter of 2024, the promise was less than 2 years away. Neither of them had spoken the words out loud in decades, but it lingered, unshakable. And then, the first real crack in the wall came in the form of an email. From Maya Langston at email.com. Subject, the bridge. Body, if you still mean it, I'll be there. Part 4, the winter before everything changed. The email sat in Ethan's inbox for an hour before he answered. He didn't overthink it this time, no drafts, no deleting. Just, then I'll see you. They agreed on a date in February, neutral ground. Not Cedarbrook, not Chicago. A small lakeside town halfway between, chosen for no reason other than it was quiet and anonymous. The morning of, Ethan woke before dawn, restless. He checked the mirror twice, as if grooming could undo the years. He packed his camera because some part of him still believed in proof. Maya drove in silence. David thought she was visiting her mother. She hated the lie, but telling the truth would have been worse, or at least messier. Snow was falling lightly when they met outside a cafe on Main Street. For a moment, neither moved. They just looked at each other, the years folding in strange, uneven ways. He was broader now, lines at the corners of his eyes. She was sharper, more composed, but her smile, the real one, was still there, just slower to appear. "Hey," Ethan said finally. "Hey," she echoed. Inside, the cafe smelled like cinnamon and espresso. They sat in a corner booth, steam curling from their mugs. Conversation started easy, updates about families, work, places they'd been. But the space between their words was thick with the things they didn't say. "You kept the promise," Ethan said at last. "I'm just making sure you keep yours," she replied with a small smile. Then, almost without thinking, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The moment was broken by the sound of a camera shutter. At first, Ethan thought it was someone else in the cafe. But then he saw the man standing by the counter, lowering his phone slowly, eyes locked on Maya. "David." He didn't shout, didn't make a scene, he just walked out. Maya's face went pale. She pulled her hand back as if burned. "I have to go," she said, and before Ethan could speak, she was gone. That night, Ethan sat in his motel room staring at the snow, the steam from his coffee cooling in the air. He thought this meeting would be a spark, a soft start to something they could rebuild. Instead, it had torn a hole in her life. In Chicago, Maya found David packing a bag. He didn't yell. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "You've been gone for years, Maya. I just finally saw it." For weeks, there was silence. No calls, no emails. The promise was still there, but now it was tangled with guilt, shame, and something deeper. The sense that fate had just reminded them how much damage they could do. By summer 2024, they still hadn't spoken. But August 14th, 2025 was coming. And both of them knew if they showed up, it couldn't be halfway. It would be all or nothing. Part 5, the last year before the bridge. The months after the cafe felt like a long winter neither of them could shake. Maya threw herself into work, editing manuscripts late into the night. Hopping exhaustion would drown the ache. Her wedding was quietly canceled, no public explanation, no messy announcements. She told friends it was mutual and changed the subject before they could pry. But at home, she found herself lingering over that black and white photograph Ethan had sent. It sat on her dresser now, framed. She told herself it was just nostalgia, a relic of who she'd been, but some nights she caught her reflection in the glass and saw longing she couldn't explain away. Ethan's year wasn't kinder. His father's health took a sharp turn. A heart attack in the spring left him weak, tethered to medications and doctor's visits. Ethan moved back to Cedarbrook temporarily to help, trading photo gigs for part-time construction work again. The familiar smell of sawdust and old wood brought back teenage summers, but now it was heavier, weighed down with responsibility. Some nights he'd walk to Miller's Creek Bridge, leaning against the railing where their initials were carved. The wood was more splintered now, the creek quieter than he remembered. He wondered if 20 years had been too long, if the people they were at 16 had been buried under too many layers of who they'd become. Then came the phone call that would shift the ground beneath him. It was late June. Maya's number lit up his phone for the first time in months. Her voice was quiet, steady, but threaded with something fragile. "Ethan, I'm not sure I can come." He didn't speak at first, just listened to the hum of the line. "Why?" "I found out I have to have surgery. Nothing life-threatening," she rushed to add, "but it's complicated. The recovery might overlap. I don't know if I'll be able to travel." Ethan felt the weight of those words like a stone in his chest. "Maya, we've been waiting for this for 20 years. "I know," she whispered. "And maybe that's why I'm scared. Because what if we get there and it's nothing? What if we ruined it already?" After the call, Ethan stood on the bridge for over an hour, thinking about how fragile time was, how easily it slipped away. He made a decision then. If she couldn't come to Cedarbrook, he'd go to her, even if it broke the promise's rules, even if she hated him for it. But fate was already winding its own path. Because while Ethan was making plans, Maya's life took another turn. 2 weeks before her surgery, she received a letter from a law firm in Portland. Inside was a check and a short note from a man she'd never met, explaining that Ethan's last freelance client had passed away and left him unpaid. The client's sister had tracked Maya down instead, believing she was his closest connection. Maya stared at the letter for a long time, the truth dawning on her. In some strange, unspoken way, they were still part of each other's lives, even when silent. Part 6, The Edge of the Promise. Maya's surgery was scheduled for late July 2025, barely 3 weeks before the date that had been etched into their lives for 2 decades. It wasn't major in the way that would make headlines, but it was major to her. Recovery would be slow, painful, and filled with the kind of restrictions that made travel nearly impossible. The doctor's advice was clear: stay local, avoid strain, focus on healing. She told herself it was final, she wouldn't make it to Cedarbrook. She even drafted the email to Ethan, trying to explain without letting him hear the disappointment in her voice. But she didn't send it. Not yet. Ethan, meanwhile, was restless. His father's health was stable but fragile. Work had slowed to a trickle, leaving him too much time to think. One humid August night, he walked to the bridge again. The cicadas sang like they had the summer they made the promise, their relentless rhythm reminding him of the way time keeps moving no matter how still you stand. He remembered something Maya had once said, years ago, when they were lying on the grass, staring at the stars. Some moments aren't about the outcome, they're about showing up. That night, he decided, even if she didn't come, he would. He'd be there at Miller's Creek Bridge from sunrise to midnight, waiting. But life rarely waits politely. A week before the 20th anniversary, Ethan's father collapsed in the kitchen. Hospital tests revealed a complication from his earlier heart attack, one that required immediate surgery. Ethan didn't leave the hospital for 3 days, living on vending machine coffee and adrenaline. On the second night, sitting in the dim light of the ICU waiting room, Ethan opened his phone and typed a message to Maya. "Might not make it either, but I'll try." She read it lying in her apartment, propped up on pillows, a heating pad across her stomach. Her own pain was still raw, her energy thin. And yet, reading his words, something sparked inside her, not anger, not sadness, but defiance. On the morning of August 13th, Maya's best friend Lena arrived unannounced, tossing a duffel bag onto her bed. "You're going," Lena said. "I can't, I'm still." "You can sit in a car for a few hours," Lena interrupted. "I'll drive, you rest, but you're going. 20 years is 20 years. Maya wanted to argue, but instead she closed her eyes and pictured the bridge. The railing, the creek below, and Ethan's not the Ethan of now, but the boy who had made her believe in forever. She nodded once. That night in the hospital, Ethan got news. The surgery had gone well. His father would be okay. Exhaustion hit him hard, but so did clarity. He didn't even go home. He got in his truck, camera in the passenger seat, and started driving. Neither of them knew the other was on the road. Part 7, 20 years to the day. August 14th, 2025. The air in Cedarbrook was warm, heavy with the smell of sun-baked earth and the faint metallic tang of the creek. The cicadas were in full chorus, just as they had been that night in 2005. Ethan arrived first. He parked on the gravel shoulder and walked the familiar path to Miller's Creek Bridge. His boots crunched on the dirt, the sound almost too loud in the stillness. When he reached the railing, he set his camera down and ran his fingers over the initials, M+E, 2005, now weathered, almost faded, but still there. He checked his watch, 9:04. He told himself he'd wait all day if he had to. Maya was slower. Lena's car pulled up just before noon. She stepped out carefully, every movement still tender from surgery. The heat wrapped around her like a blanket. She saw him before he saw her. He was leaning on the railing, head bowed slightly, camera strap looped around his wrist. For a moment, she didn't move, just watched him, letting the years compress into a single heartbeat. "Hey," she said softly. He turned, and for a second, neither of them breathed. They stood close, but not touching, as if afraid that contact might shatter whatever this was. "You made it," Ethan said, his voice catching. "So did you." "I wasn't sure." "Me neither." They started talking, the way you do when you're afraid silence will swallow you whole. They talked about the past 20 years, what they remembered, what they wished they could forget. And then Maya asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd stayed in touch?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and wrapped in paper. It was the original note she'd left under the bridge in 2014, still here. "I've carried it ever since," he said. Her eyes glistened. "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "I knew someday I'd have to give it back." They were so wrapped in that moment, they didn't notice the car approaching until it stopped behind them. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. It was David. Maya's stomach dropped. "I figured you'd be here," David said evenly. "You never deleted that date from your calendar." Ethan straightened. "You followed her." David ignored him, eyes fixed on Maya. "You had your 20 years, Maya. Now what? You walk away from everything again." She didn't answer. Her pulse roared in her ears. This was the twist neither had imagined. The past colliding with the present in flesh and blood. David took a step closer. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to ask, is this what you've been waiting for?" Maya looked from David to Ethan. 2 decades of what-ifs and almosts were pressing down on her. And for the first time, she realized the promise wasn't about choosing Ethan. It was about choosing herself. Part 8, choosing what the promise meant. The sun was directly overhead now, spilling white light across the bridge and making the carved initials glow pale against the weathered wood. Maya's hands rested on the railing, her fingers brushing the grooves of M+E, 2005. She could feel both men watching her, one holding 20 years of history, the other holding the life she had built in the meantime. David's voice was steady but low. "You can come home with me now, Maya. We can fix this. Or you can stay here and I'll know it's over." Ethan didn't say anything. He stood slightly apart, not pleading, not pushing, just waiting, the way he had promised to wait all those years ago. Her mind darted through memories. 16-year-old Maya, barefoot on the bridge, laughing so hard her ribs hurt. 24-year-old Maya, alone in a Chicago apartment, staring at that photograph. 35-year-old Maya, surgery stitches pulling with every breath, hearing Lena's voice. 20 years is 20 years. And suddenly, she understood, the promise wasn't about romance. It was about showing up for the person she used to be, about keeping her word to herself. She turned to David first. "You're a good man," she said softly, "but I've been living my life trying not to disappoint people. I can't do that anymore." David's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Then I guess that's my answer. Without another word, he turned, walked to his car, and drove away. The bridge was quiet again. Ethan exhaled slowly. I didn't come here to break anything in your life, Maya. You didn't, she said, shaking her head. You reminded me that I had one before all this. She gestured vaguely toward the road David had taken. They stood side by side, looking down at the water. So what now? He asked. She smiled faintly. Now we see who we are without a countdown. They didn't kiss. They didn't make another promise. They just stayed there until the light began to fade, talking about the little things, the sound of the creek, the way the cicadas had never changed. When they finally left, they walked in opposite directions, each carrying something lighter than when they'd arrived. Epilogue, August 14th, 2026. A year later, Maya stood on the bridge alone. She leaned on the railing, looking at the initials. Below them, new letters had been carved. M+E, 2025. She smiled, pulled a pen from her pocket, and wrote a short note on the back of a receipt. She tucked it under the railing. It said, still here. Part 9, Summer of the Fireflies, Flashback, 2005. It had been one of those sweltering July nights, when Cedarbrook seemed too small to hold their restless energy. Ethan had shown up at Maya's window just after midnight, tapping the glass until she slid it open. Come on, he whispered. I've got something to show you. They biked out past the old baseball field to the edge of Miller's Creek Woods. And there, in the clearing, 1,000 fireflies floated like sparks in slow motion. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and damp earth. Maya whispered, It's like the sky fell down here. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was busy fiddling with his camera. But when he did speak, it was soft, almost shy. I wanted to get a picture of you here, so when we're old, I can prove you were part of the magic. She laughed, tossing her hair. I am the magic. But she stood still while he took the shot. That photograph, her face glowing in the firefly light, would be one of the last pictures of them together before life began its long pull apart. Part 10, the year they almost crossed paths, 2014. Chicago, autumn. Maya was walking home from the bookstore when the first snowflakes began to fall. She stopped under a street lamp, watching them melt on her coat sleeve. 2 miles away, Ethan was in town shooting a magazine spread for a jazz club. His editor had booked him a hotel 3 blocks from Maya's apartment. Neither of them knew. That night, as she sipped tea and read on her couch, he sat in a dimly lit club, photographing a saxophonist whose music curled through the air like smoke. The next morning, they passed within 50 feet of each other on Michigan Avenue, Maya leaving her office early, Ethan carrying his camera bag toward the train. He caught a glimpse of a woman with familiar hair, but the crowd swept her away before he could be sure. Later, back in Portland, he would remember that moment with a strange ache, the way you remember a dream you almost stayed inside. Part 11, Letters Never Sent, 2010-2019. Over the years, they each wrote things they never mailed. Ethan kept his in a shoebox, pages torn from cheap notebooks, scribbled in coffee shops and motels. One said simply, Maya, I saw a creek today that looked like ours. Thought you should know. Another was a full page describing a dream where they were both old and still sitting on the bridge. Maya's were typed on her laptop, saved in a folder named Drafts. She'd start with small things, a poem she thought he'd like, a photograph she saw online, and end up pouring out confessions she wasn't ready for. I'm afraid if we meet again, we won't recognize each other, she wrote in 2016. But I'm more afraid that we will. Neither of them deleted these letters. Neither of them sent them. Part 12, The Weight of the Date, 2020-2025. The pandemic years blurred into each other. Maya spent much of it working from her apartment, the city outside eerily quiet. Some nights she'd walk the empty streets and think of Cedarbrook's silence, not the kind born from fear, but from the hum of cicadas and the slow breathing of summer nights. Ethan lost half his photography clients, but gained an unexpected following online, posting old travel shots. One of the most liked was a black and white image of a wooden bridge over a narrow creek, captioned only, August 14th. Messages flooded in, strangers asking if it was from a lost love story. He never answered. As 2025 approached, the date seemed to take on a gravitational pull. Every choice felt heavier, as if it were leading them inevitably toward Miller's Creek Bridge, whether they wanted it or not.